Today's video is sponsored by Sakurako and Tokyo Treat. More on that later. The best introduction is a short one, so today's main video prompt was once again brought to my attention on Twitter by Examiny623 regarding Wrecking Crew and Spirit Battles. First, you're going to want to find a Spirit Battle that takes place on normal Wrecking Crew, which is easier said than done for someone like me with a terrible Spirits collection, given that none of the DLC take place on the stage. But luckily I had a lot of Spirit board shuffles, so I managed to find a few. What you want to do is just keep on destroying layers without letting the match end. And after only a few minutes of doing this, you'll find that you're left with nothing. The layers stop spawning and we get to see the barren Wrecking Crew for probably the first time ever, at least for me. It's a pretty cool sight, honestly. It's like one of those cheesy liminal space photos or whatever. I'm not entirely sure why there's a limit for this specifically in Spirit Battles, but it doesn't take long at all to reach this limit. I only counted around 20 layers total. Because of that, I sort of assume it's intentional by design, or at the very least, I feel like they wouldn't have not noticed this, but it's hard to say since I don't know why they did it. But this probably sparks one big question in your head. What about a normal match? Thus begins the game of Wrecking Crew. My general pace was about 20 or so layers a minute, or rather 100 every 5 minutes or so. It's hard to gauge given how layers aren't always even, but I felt that was a fair average. So here's me after 50 minutes, which is when I would reach about 1,000 layers destroyed. And yeah, nothing's changing. But I needed to push a little bit further, so here's me after 2 hours. Well over 2,000 layers, probably close to 2,500, and it was at this point I began experiencing a form of brain rot, so I just decided to call it there. It didn't seem like I was going to be reaching any limits anytime soon. It got to the point where I started recognizing half of the layer formations, and I took that as a sign that it was just going to loop infinitely. So, just as we may never know how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, the world may never know if there's truly a limit to Wrecking Crew on a normal match. Or I guess people could just look into the code or something and find out that way. I mean, they're kind of good at that, so, you know. I did learn a few neat things about the stage during all this testing, like how this wall pattern only takes one explosion to break, and this one 2, and this one 3. Or what happens if you get stuck between 2 barrels? Nothing much, but it's kind of funny. And there was a time where the clouds in the background suddenly reset position rather than looping smoothly, though I forgot to hit record for that, so you just have to take my word on it. It happened about an hour in or so. Also, here's what the parts of the stage that are normally out of the camera look like. The new layers just spawn in a single frame. So there you go, I tested it so you don't have to, unless, you feel like one-upping me and going for 5,000 layers. Or 10,000, I mean, it's your time. Ultimately, yeah, that was 2 hours of my life I'm never going to get back, so please subscribe and like and comment and tell me nice things. For now, I gotta rest my mind. Perhaps with some lovely, authentic Japanese treats, courtesy of today's video sponsor, Sakurako and Tokyo Treat. Sakurako and Tokyo Treat are two Japanese snack box services that deliver monthly themed treats right to your door. Tokyo Treat is more along the lines of popular Japanese snacks, the kind of stuff you'd probably see in a grocery store there, at least that's kind of what it feels like. You have things like Kit Kat flavors, or sodas, or instant soba noodles. The Kit Kats even came in one of those Japan exclusive flavors, this time being peach, which I love because I always hear about how Japan has such better flavor options and limited time specials compared to anywhere around here. So this is a great opportunity to try that. And with the box containing up to 20 items, there's bound to be plenty of different options to choose from. Sakurako also comes with 20 items, though it usually contains more traditional artisan Japanese snacks, and includes some tea as well as a piece of tableware for your troubles. Now, I've always appreciated this. I love having a nice tea collection to try out, and having beautiful kitchenware to boot is much appreciated with my currently low quality set. And obviously there's plenty of sweets and baked goods and all that other stuff that'll really send home that feeling of Japanese culture, which Sakurako gets directly from local Japanese snack makers, so you know all of this stuff is authentic. And with either box you get this month, the theme is based primarily around sakuras, or rather cherry blossoms, and contain flavors and loads of snacks that are limited only to this month. I really love the Kit Kats in the Tokyo Treat box, and the Sakura Manju in the Sakurako box was incredibly good. Though obviously I haven't tried all of them yet, I'm still watching my weight, Either way, when you get the box, you might realize that you have a hard time, reading stuff. Luckily, each and every box comes with a pamphlet describing the culture behind the box theme, the process behind making some of the contents, and information about every single item in there. The information includes, what it even is, but it also mentions common allergens, as well as potentially cautious ingredients, and whether or not it's vegetarian, which I really appreciate, so you don't have to be worried about not knowing what you're eating when you get one of these boxes. Which of the two boxes you decide to go with is up to you, of course. If you want something more artisan, kinda more like something you'd get at like a bakery or snack shop, then I'd say Sakurako is the way to go. But if you want something more familiar yet different, again closer to what you might find at a grocery store, then Tokyo Treat is probably better. I mean, I like to get both monthly, but I know how it is. Whichever you decide, click on the link down in the description and use code PKBEATS in all caps to get $5 off your first order for Sakurako and or Tokyo Treat. And be sure to order by March 31st to receive this month's Sakura-based themes. I highly recommend this service, and thank you Sakurako and Tokyo Treat for sponsoring today's video. Anyway, back to spirits, but Monkey Man asks what happens if Yoshi has a spirit that gives him an extra jump. The idea behind this question is in regards to Yoshi's flutter jump. It's unique in a few ways, one of which being that it's practically his only form of recovery, but because of that, it has some armor to it, meaning it can tank weaker hits without taking knockback or flinching. While the lack of a proper recovery can hurt, this armor is actually insanely useful. So when Yoshi has a spirit that grants him an extra jump, what happens? Well, visually the jump is identical to his normal flutter jump. And with the spirit set, the first flutter jump still has armor, but on top of this, his second flutter jump also has armor. This is actually an insanely good set then, since it covers a lot of the potential mobility and recovery issues while essentially doubling his escape tool. I mean, spirits in general are kind of broken, so seeing Bonker's application like this isn't exactly riveting, but it's at least a more unique form of being powerful, which I think is interesting. Also, this was my first time making use of this spirit since I only just got it. I got lucky in my spirit board search earlier. That's actually why this submission has been collecting dust for so long. I'm pretty sure it's been in my back pocket for like a few years now, maybe. Anyhow, I didn't even know how it'd handle some multi-jumps, so I was curious to see that. Kirby's normally got 5 mid-air jumps, but with the extra jump spirit, it gets increased to 6, which makes perfect sense. And you can tell exactly where that extra jump is placed based on the animations. With Kirby, you can tell when he's reaching his mid-air jump limit because each subsequent jump has him be less and less puffy. With the extra jump spirit, this small tipped over animation gets duplicated at the end. So we can just see that they reuse the final animation for that extra jump. Which I guess isn't really surprising anyone, but I was just curious, you know. Also yes, the smoke animation that plays when you're out of jumps is kept accurate here. Not happening after your normal midair jump, but happening after your extra jump, when you know you are out of jumps. So good on them. Anyhow, moving on, I actually just randomly had a thought, but I was curious about what happened if two sources of that reverse controls effect stacked. Initially, this was thought up because of Sephiroth's Final Smash, since one of its potential effects is reverse controls, but then I realized that this effect causes a mushroom to appear on your head, meaning it's basically the same as the Ramblin' Evil Mushroom, meaning not only is the wiki wrong about the item being the only source of this effect now, but it also means that I won't be able to stack it. Luckily for us, one of Ashley's Brap Cloud effects is temporary reverse controls, so we can just use this. The effect is kinda weird, I feel. It barely lasts any time and is kinda wonky in how it reverses your controls, but it should still be good enough. And sure enough, once I get the perfect RNG and setup, there's a very small moment where my input actually brings me into the proper direction, despite having the mushroom on my head. This means Ashley's reverse controls effect came into play, and was multiplied with the mushrooms, and therefore they cancelled out, 2 negatives making a positive. It's kinda difficult for me to show this since I don't have a dedicated controller cam, so you'll just have to take my word for it. I wasn't sure if anything would happen, so I think it's pretty hysterical that the effects can actually cancel out, and you'll walk normally for a little bit. Granted, yes, it is a very little bit, but it still happens. Anyhow, speaking of Samus, I didn't actually say anything about her, but she was used in the footage. Anyways, Brody Leffler gives me a fact regarding Samus and Dark Samus's final smashes. If you look at Samus's final smash, you might notice that her jetpack is going a bit crazy, with large, intense flames and whatnot. It's very easy to chalk this up as just some visual flair, her backing some weight behind her blast, but in actuality, these jetpack flames are a hitbox. They do very little damage and only really flinch, but they're a hitbox nonetheless. This is funny because Dark Samus is lacking any jet package, and is thus lacking the hitbox, or any back hitbox of any sort, outside of the final hit. As far as I can tell, the normal damage and knockback behind these two final smashes are identical, so outside of visuals, this is the sole difference between these two moves. And I think that's just crazy, but also really funny. Like, Samus just has that small edge over Dark Samus because of something so minuscule. Actually, on second thought, that could be argued, because the jetpack hitbox will likely knock people away, so if they somehow hit it in just that, it'll kinda protect them from being dragged into the main beam. whereas Dark Samus, without that, will have no problems there. And the extra percent doesn't really come into play in the long run either, so I'll just let you guys decide the meta behind that distinction. Speaking of stuff, GamerDude535 gives me a fun little tidbit regarding Hero's Gazep while being stuck in a black hole. It's pretty simple really, if you use Gazep in a black hole, the lightning will just hit you instead. Basically, projectiles caught in the black hole will get sucked up into the center and disappear. And I guess the property of the projectile gets changed to whoever threw the black hole when this happens. Which means a lot of projectiles are probably going to spiral back around and hit you. So if anything, it's kind of like a weird makeshift reflector. But not really, but kinda? I imagine this will be new information for at least a few people, so I figured it was worth mentioning. But the primary reason why I even brought it up was to shamelessly segue into another random thought I had. I was curious. What was stronger, the item gravitation spirit or the black hole? And as it turns out, the black hole wins. Pretty strongly, too. You can see the green shell trying to fight back, but it is not getting out anytime soon. And I'm using a set with 3 item gravitational spirit effects. So once again in nature, the black hole reigns supreme. But the primary reason why I even brought this up was to shamelessly segue into this fact by Amakobra, regarding item gravitation spirits and Sheik's grenade. That is, if anyone has an item gravitation spirit equipped, Sheik's grenade will just fail. If you let go instantly, nothing will happen. And if you hold it for a while, it'll go flying across the stage. And it doesn't matter where you are in relation to the person with the spirit, it's just gonna fail. The only time where it doesn't fail is when the person with the spirit gets KO'd. It works properly in that very small period where they're gone, but not yet respawned. Outside of that, it's basically useless. And when I say it doesn't matter where you are in relation to the person with the spirit, I really mean that. From opposite sides of the training mode stage, Sheik's bomb still does not work. It just flies away haphazardly. And let me remind you that this is well outside of the normal item gravitation range. In fact, the item gravitation effect isn't really even doing anything. If there's enough flat terrain, we can see that the grenade slide just suddenly stops, rather than fully being pulled across. So this means that the item gravitation isn't even like latching onto it. For whatever reason, it just doesn't work. And this is only with a single spirit attached, mind you, meaning the effect in general just completely ruins the move. And this also applies to when Sheik herself has it, and is actually even worse here considering that the grace period of the enemy being KO'd can't really apply. Granted, because it always sorta interrupts the attack, you always have fairly easy access to the grenade item. So if you're trying to do combos with this item, or whatever you kids are doing nowadays, this can help, I guess. Next up, Daniel R gives me a fact regarding Inkling's roller and size change. Inkling's ink roller usually has a limit of about 7 training mode stage square unit things. Once you exceed that, the previous parts disappear long before they normally should. This includes inking over an already covered area. And this is just generally about the total space covered, it's not just one streak. So having multiple different ink spots can still only add up to around 7 squares. However, if you make the inkling bigger, this gets increased by a lot. It's now over 35 squares of distance. And the thing is, this is a minimum. You see, by this point I run out of ink, and there's just not enough time for me to cancel the move, charge up more ink, and keep going before the rest of the trail starts to naturally fade away. So in a realistic sense, you're not limited by how much ink you can place down at a time, but rather by how much ink you can hold at a time. And from my testing, items and spirits that increase speed do not seem to affect the roller. So unless there are exceptions to that, this can't really work. Unless someone mods the game to give Inkling infinite ink storage, I won't be able to tell you the true limit of this. And let me tell you, modding a Switch is kinda scary, and I only have one Switch, so I kinda don't want to do that. But basically, yeah, you can cover way more area by just being bigger. And it's really weird because the Super Mushroom doesn't even double the character's size, and yet this increase in ink coverage is over 5 times greater. This leads me to believe something way weirder is happening. Another reason why I believe that is based on what happens when Inkling becomes smaller. You'd probably expect that the coverage distance becomes shorter too, but here we can see that the actual ink limit is a little bit larger than normal. It has its limits, but it's almost 8 squares of distance, compared to the normal 7 square limit. So why would Inkling becoming smaller increase this? I recognize that with size change comes a change in speed for some of these moves, like Inkling moves faster when they're smaller and slower when they're larger, but this is to make them travel around the same distance as their normal size. So wouldn't the ink coverage also be the same as normal? If anyone's got any theories or answers, leave them down below, I am very interested. Speaking of Inkling, lastly for today's video, Dark Red Doom gives me a little fact regarding characters holding B while shielding. When you're shielding, you can tilt your control stick to angle the shield, which can be nice to avoid shield pokes when it's small, but when you do this, you run the risk of accidentally inputting a roll or a spot dodge if you're too quick with the control stick input. There are two ways to circumvent this. Either you hold two different shield buttons at once if you have multiple mapped, which lets you angle your shield with zero risk of rolling or anything, or you can simply hold down the special button while shielding, which does the same thing. But there are some exceptions to this. Inkling is an obvious one because holding down the special input while shielding just has them enter their ink refill animation. So they can't really make use of that technique and have to rely on having two shield buttons mapped if they want to do that. And another exception is Snake, for some reason. Holding B while in shield does not make him enter any specific animation or anything, yet it just doesn't work with this technique like with basically everyone else. If I had to venture a guess, it might have to do with how his grenade input works, and how you can hold a grenade but shield to let go of it or something. That's just kind of me grasping at straws though, I don't really know why that'd carry over when there's no grenade at play. But that's just a funny little character mechanic you might not have known about. And with that, thank you for watching today's video. So here starts the traditional post-video commentary whatever. I actually forgot to mention that last video, and while I've talked about it in community tabs and other places, I figure I should at least mention it here. But because Gilva Sunder's channel got taken down, a lot of the music sources in my past videos are now completely out of date. Considering I use very similar series songs and specific songs, a good chunk of my past descriptions and iCards are now outdated. Which is annoying and sad and all of that, but I'm gonna be honest, I have zero desire to go through all of my past videos and fix them. Going forward, I'll probably just be linking whatever I can find, which usually ends up being extended versions of the song, rather than just the normal song, but I'm sure no one would really mind that, you know? So just a heads up if you're new to the channel and plan on going to past videos, or if you're wondering for any other reason. By the way, if you are new and you're still watching, that probably means you like what you've seen so far. So please look down below and see if you're subscribed or not, and if you aren't, hit that subscribe button because it would make me smile, and you don't want to make me not smile, do you? Also, I just want to give yet another thanks to Sakudoko and Tokyo Treat for sponsoring today's video. They really do offer some terrific products, and I genuinely cannot recommend them enough. So be sure to take advantage of their deals by using the links in the description. You won't regret it. Anyhow, I'd like to thank my Patreon Skully, Burbo, Raighne, Sylvi700, and everyone else for their support. Stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.